We figured kind of like with Easter next week. What was that? Yeah, I figured. With Easter being next week, I wanted to kind of take some time to go through some of the uh, stuff that happened leading up to the crucifixion and resurrection. So, in I guess typical fashion, um, I kind of went through and wanted to really highlight everything that happened prior to the resurrection, because on Easter Sunday I don't want to be focused on the cross. I want to be focused on the empty grave. So let's take the time today to really focus on what happened on the cross and the events that led up to it, more so the events that led up to it, just because I find it really interesting. And then because we're going to be reading together as a family out of the book of John this month, I figured let's do it out of John and let's see what John has to say compared to some of the other accounts. So that's what we're doing. But first, before we get there, I need to start with the account with Lazarus, and there's a reason, I promise. So, in case you forget or in case you don't know, Lazarus was a friend of Jesus's. He and his sisters, Mary and Martha, were somebody that he actually was able to stay with them frequently and got to know them very well. Lazarus got sick and died, and he was very, the Mary and Martha were very distressed about everything because they knew the miracle power that Jesus had. And Mary and Martha even came up to Jesus when he did finally arrive. It's actually funny. They tell Jesus, "Hey, Jesus, your friend is sick." And it says that Jesus was upset about it, but he stayed like 3 more days, wherever he was. He's like, "I'm not going right away." So anyway, so everything happens, and Mary and Martha are really upset that Jesus didn't come earlier. I believe it's Mary even says something to the effect of, "Jesus, had you been here, Lazarus wouldn't be dead." And Jesus says, "Have faith, just relax. I still know what I'm doing," basically. And so all this stuff kind of came, and it's really awesome. The shortest verse in the Bible's in here. It just says Jesus wept, and a lot of people read that, and they will read that as that Jesus was very sad because of the death of his friend, and that's 100% plausible. I agree with that. However, another thought process here is that Jesus already knew he was raising Lazarus, so why was he sad that his friend was dead? I'm bringing you back to life, man. I'm not sad for you. This is going to be fun. Let's see what happens. So why then did he cry? I think it's just because he had Mary and Martha who he had trained in how to do these things, and they didn't heal their brother. They didn't raise their brother. Like, he's like, "Hey guys, like let's go. Let's raise this level of faith. Let's get Lazarus out of the grave." In fact, Jesus does this frequently, especially in the when he's raising the dead. He'll kick out anybody that doesn't believe. He'll walk in. He walked into a building of a kid that had died, and all the mourners and professional mourners, by the way. These are people that you had to hire to come to your house to cry for you, like professional mourners. And he would come in, or he walked in. He was like, "Oh no, this kid's not dead. He's just sleeping." And they all laughed because they're professional mourners. They've seen dead bodies. So, like, they know when somebody's dead. And they just laughed at him. And he said, "All right, then get out." And he just cleared the house of all these people that wouldn't believe that the kid was just sleeping. And then Jesus went and raised the dead. So it's interesting to me that this is kind of the cycle of what always happens, that Jesus is upset. And I don't know that Jesus is upset about the event that's happening as much as he is upset about the people that are still around's lack of faith. You see, Mary and Martha could have raised Lazarus. Lazarus could have prayed for himself to get better. But he goes through the process anyway, and Jesus does end up raising Lazarus from the dead. And this is where we're going to pick up. So John verse 11, starting in verse 45. It says, "Many of the people who had come to visit Mary and saw what Jesus did believed in him." Now, that's kind of like the understatement of the century. If you are Jesus and you go into a place and you raise this prominent man back to life, people believe in you. No kidding, right? Like that's kind of an obvious statement. When you do something that big, people are going to notice. Verse 46, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. They went and told mom and dad. Then the leading priests and Pharisees called a meeting of the council. They asked, what should we do? This man is doing many miracles. If we let him continue doing these things, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and take away our temple and our nation. It's interesting to me the problem that they thought was happening. The problem for them wasn't dead Lazarus. The problem for them was miracle-working Jesus. That was the problem for them. Lazarus being dead, everybody dies. I'm not worried about them. You know, that's not going to come back to Rome and say, oh, look, Lazarus died. Oops, you know. No, it's the miracle-working Jesus that can overturn Lazarus being dead. That's the real threat to us. Why? Because, well, if Rome finds out that we have somebody that can heal the dead, then what's Rome going to do? Right? That means, you know, maybe there's an uprising and Jesus can heal all the dead bodies. I don't know. Like, what does that look like? So they're afraid, but they're not afraid of death. They're not afraid of Lazarus. They're afraid of what Jesus did. Verse 49. One of the men there was Caiaphas, the high priest that year. He said, you people know nothing. I love how blunt he is. You people know nothing. You don't realize that it is better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to be destroyed. Caiaphas did not think of this himself. As high priest that year, he was really prophesying that Jesus would die for the nation and for God's scattered children to bring them together and make them one. That day, they started planning to kill Jesus. Now, think this through, ready? Jesus does the miracle of all miracles and raises a dead body, and what's the response? Oh no, the Romans are going to come, let's kill that guy. It doesn't make any sense. I want you guys to remember that these were the pastors of their day. These were the religious leaders. They had the Torah memorized line by line. Well, to be a good Christian, you need to pray and you need to read your Bible. That's absolutely true, but I want you to know the Pharisees and Sadducees were doing that too, and they did it better than you. They had it memorized. They had prayer all the time for them. So what's the difference here? They didn't have a relationship. When God came in the flesh, when Jesus showed up, they didn't make the connection to all the stuff they knew. They wanted it all to stay up here. They had the head smarts for it, but none of it translated to a relationship with who Jesus actually was. So what did they do then? They said, oh, we don't like this. Let's kill him. Caiaphas unknowingly prophesied that one man would die for all. That's literally what Jesus did, right? He said it. He's saying, look, let's just kill this guy and then we'll save our nation. The Romans won't come and take us over. That's what he's thinking he's meaning. That's not what really was happening. That's not what the prophecy really was. It was Jesus is going to die on the cross, and it's going to have an opportunity for salvation for everybody, both Jews and Gentiles, which I promise you, if Caiaphas had known that, he probably would have kept his mouth shut. Because at that point, if Caiaphas had said that, knowing that, he would have been called a heretic as the high priest. So they decide to put that plan into action, and they plot to kill Jesus from that point on. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to skip ahead a couple chapters. We're going to go to John 18. We're actually going to spend the rest of our time in John 18 and 19. I'm going to read a good chunk of it, so just as a heads up, we're going to stop and kind of talk about what's happening. So in John 18, starting in verse 1, it says, when Jesus finished praying, he went with his followers across the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and Jesus and his followers went into it. Okay, no problem. This is after the Last Supper. Jesus finished praying for the Last Supper, and he said, hey, let's go out to this garden. Verse 2, Judas knew where this place was because Jesus met there often with his followers. Judas was the one who turned against Jesus. Remember that in the Last Supper, Judas leaves, right? Jesus basically calls him out and says, hey, one of you is going to betray me. And then everybody was like, oh, is it me? And he said no. And then Judas basically, Jesus looked at Judas and said, what you're about to do, just do it quickly. Judas knew exactly what he meant and took off running. So Judas knew that they were about to go to this garden. So when they all left without Judas, Judas knew where to meet up with them. So Judas knew where the place was. Verse 3, so Judas came there with a group of soldiers and some guards from the leading priests and the Pharisees. Ah, the Pharisees are back. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. It's interesting to me that for somebody that had been following around with Jesus this entire time, he apparently encouraged them to bring weapons. And maybe it's because right before this, Jesus tells everybody to grab a sword. To me, it's funny. Like Jesus, what we always see, meek and mild Jesus. No, he's saying, hey guys, equip yourselves, arm yourselves. It's interesting in a few minutes here, so just hold on to that thought. Remember, Jesus is the one that said bring the sword. Okay? Verse 4, knowing everything that would happen to him, Jesus went out and asked, who is it that you're looking for? I love this. So Jesus sees the mob. To me, the picture that I always get in my head is like the old cartoons, the mobs with the pitchforks and the torches, and they're just coming out to get Jesus. Like that's what I see, like this giant mob of people coming. But remember who is in this mob. It's not just a mob of regular people. It is the guards, the soldiers. By the way, those are the Romans, the people that the priests were afraid of. The guards and the Romans, the soldiers, both Romans. And then you had the leading priests and the Pharisees. They're the Jews. They're the pastors. So you had this like conglomerate of people that were Roman and Jewish. You had people that were there for civil duty, and you had people that were there for religious duty, quote unquote, or the spirit of religious duty, I guess would be a better way of saying that. Anyway, so he comes out. Jesus just walks right up to him and says, hey guys, who are you looking for? He knows it's him. He says, hey, who are you looking for? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth, verse 5. He answered, I am he. Jesus comes up and says, yeah, that's me. You're looking for me. I'm right here. The irony of this for me is that when you actually look at what that is, it doesn't say he. He said, I am. Who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth, I am. Why is that important? What's the name of God? I am. He's the great I am. Jesus said, I am. Who are you looking for, Jesus? I am. Why is that? Why would he do that? Well, the next verse 6. When Jesus said, I am, they moved back and fell to the ground. When Jesus declared the name of God into the atmosphere in that moment, it basically freaked them out so much that they kind of fell backwards. I kind of see this as he said it and it all kind of hit them with this wave of force, and they just kind of got paralyzed and fell over. Verse 7. I love this. Jesus, remember, they're all laying on the ground now. Jesus said, wait, who were you looking for again? And they're like, Jesus of Nazareth? Wait a second, the last time I did this, I fell over. What's going on? Then he said, I told you I am he. I told you I am. Now, in that moment, what I'm seeing there is Jesus is reminding them of the past. Remember that these are the Romans and these are the Jews. These are also the spiritual pastors of the day. And he's telling them, hey, look, guys, I've been telling you that that's who I am. See, I have the power of God is coming through me to the point where I just had to say a word and you fell to the ground. And then when I asked you again, who are you looking for? And you said, Jesus. Hey, guys, I'm telling you, I told you this whole time that that's who I am. Why didn't you believe me? Again, it comes down to Jesus around a bunch of people saying, why don't you just believe it? What's so hard about this? Verse 8, I told you I am he, Jesus said. So if you're looking for me, let the others go. This happened so the words of Jesus said before would come true. I have not lost any of the ones that you gave me. Jesus made a prophecy earlier that he would not lose any of his disciples. None of them would die. And I think if I remember correctly, in the prophecy it says, except for the man of perdition or whatever it is, meaning Judas. John doesn't account for Judas after this. The other the other accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, some of them do account for Judas. Judas goes off and hangs himself. But in this part, Jesus is saying, look, I'm not, you're looking for me. I told you that that's who I am. I told you that this is who I've been the whole time. Just take me. I know what you're here for. I know what's going to come of this. I know what I'm supposed to do here. Let them go. Okay? Here we go. Remember this. Verse 10. Ready, Josh? Simon Peter, who had a sword that Jesus told him to bring, pulled it out and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, put your sword back. Shouldn't I drink the cup that the Father gave me? Jesus told Peter to bring the sword. He didn't tell him to use it. That doesn't mean that you don't use it. It means you need to wait for him to tell you to use it. Peter did it in a time of fear, anger, a little bit of everything. And he took it out on somebody that probably didn't really have any part in this. He cut off a servant's ear. He didn't go after one of the Pharisees. He didn't go after one of the Romans. He went after this servant. Now, it's possible, especially in that day, that they had like armor bearers. You know, people would actually carry the swords and stuff like that of the quote-unquote important people. So it's possible that's what this was. But even in that, why would you go for the servant and not the guy that had no armor? Just a thought. Jesus said to Peter, put your sword back. Shouldn't I drink the cup that the Father gave me? Then the soldiers with their commander and guards arrested Jesus, and they tied him and led him first to Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who told the Jews that it would be better if one man died for all people. This is John reminding you, hey, remember who Caiaphas is? He's the one that said one man's going to die for all people. We're bringing him back into the story. Skipping ahead for a little bit, in verse 18, it starts talking about Peter's denial. I didn't want to, spend time talking about Peter's denial. I just want to follow Jesus' account. So I'm going to skip ahead to verse 19. Verse 19 says, the high priest asked Jesus questions about his followers and his teaching. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to everyone. This is going back to Jesus is telling them, look, I've already told you all this. I told you who I am. I told you I am here. Why don't you just believe me? I have spoken openly to everyone. I have always taught in the synagogues and the temples where all the Jews come together. I never said anything in secret. So why do you question me? Ask the people who heard my teaching. They know what I said. Now let's be honest here. This is Jesus, obviously, but I've been here for 4 years preaching. I don't know that I would be 100% confident in telling somebody that's coming after me and me just say, well, just ask the people at church. They know everything I've ever said. I wouldn't believe that, but Jesus did. Jesus said, ask them. They know. They heard it. In fact, most of you are also the people that were there and heard it. You should just ask yourself. These Pharisees, a lot of them were in the back trying to figure out ways to question Jesus. Trying to make, false accusations against him. They did all sorts of stuff. Most of the people in this moment right here are also there and could also have accounted for it if they were honest. Verse 22, when Jesus said this, one of the guards standing there hit him. The guard said, is that the way you should answer the high priest? Jesus answered them, if I said something wrong, tell me what it was. But if what I said is true, then why did you hit me? The guard was so infuriated, not because of what he said, as Jesus said, what he said was true. The guard was infuriated because he talked that way to a high priest. Now, in that day, let's think, there's a hierarchy here. Jesus is, quote-unquote, just a rabbi according to them. Therefore, he is an underling to the high priests. And that's why he's seeing this guard is seeing this as a bad thing. But that's not reality. In reality, that high priest is a high priest of God, of whom Jesus is, and has just said, I am. There should have been a recognition there that didn't occur. There should have been a changing there, but it never came about. Verse 24, then Annas sent Jesus, who is still tied, to Caiaphas the high priest. So, we have the first thing that happens. So they come to the garden, they arrest him after they all get back up. And they arrest him and they bring him to Annas. Annas is the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas is the high priest. And Annas is the one that tries to question him originally. It doesn't go well. And Annas is like, I'm done talking to you. Go to Caiaphas. So they just kind of pass it along to the next parent, quote unquote, in that time. So we're going to skip ahead to verse 28. John 18, verse 28. Oh, by the way, that gap is another Peter denial, in case you're curious. Denial number 2. Actually, I think it's 2 and 3. Verse 28, early in the morning, they led Jesus from Caiaphas' house to the Roman governor's palace. So I want you to see here that they don't actually mention him talking to Caiaphas, at least not in John. Some of the other accounts they do. But here in John, they skip right ahead. They take him from Caiaphas' house to the Roman governor's palace. So I'm done talking to you as far as religious law and Jews. I'm now going to take you to the Romans. But they would not go inside the palace. I love this. They would not. So the Jewish leaders refused to go into the palace because they didn't want to make themselves unclean because it was Passover. It's a holiday tomorrow. I'm not going to make myself unclean and not be able to celebrate my holiday. So we'll just kind of push you inside and stand outside and talk to them from the balcony. Like literally, that's what's happening here. So Pilate went outside to them. Okay, fine. Pilate comes out to the balcony, right? So Pilate went outside to them and asked, what charges do you bring against this man? Pilate is a no-nonsense guy. He just wants to know what's happening. Let me know so that I can do what I'm supposed to do. But if I don't agree with you, then I don't agree with you. Verse 30, they answered, if he were not a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him to you. That did not answer the question. The question was, what charges do you bring? And they said, he has some. He's a criminal. I'm not going to tell you what it was. Pilate said to them, then take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. If he's just a criminal for you, then just deal with it yourself. You don't need me. They responded, though, but we are not allowed to put anyone to death. This happened so that what Jesus said about how he would die would come true. Verse 33, then Pilate went back inside the palace and called Jesus to him and asked, are you the king of the Jews? So remember, the spiritual leaders and all are not willing to go inside this palace and defile themselves right before Passover. But he calls Jesus in, and Jesus is like, okay, let's go. So he goes in, and the first question out of his mouth is, are you the king of the Jews? That's an odd question for a Roman. A Roman who is, in reality, very nervous about uprisings of kings and emperors, because in that era, it happened frequently. Especially for the Romans. The Romans were the big bad guy on the block. They had the target, all the targets were on their back because they were the big one. Jesus answered back, is that your own question? Or did others tell you about me? Again, Jesus also doesn't really answer questions very, very directly. Pilate said, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, did you think of that question yourself? Or did somebody else give you that question to ask me? Pilate answered, I am not one of you. It was your own people and their priests who handed you over to me. What have you done wrong? Pilate's trying to figure this out. What did you do wrong? I don't want to condemn an innocent person. In fact, I want you to know that in another account of this, Pilate's wife sees Jesus coming. And Pilate's wife goes to Pilate and says, don't do anything to this guy. I had a dream. And in that dream, it was bad news when we did something bad to this guy. Don't do it. So Pilate is heeding the thought of the dream of his wife and is trying to find every excuse to let Jesus off. So Pilate asked, what have you done wrong? Verse 36, Jesus answered, he finally answers the king question. My kingdom does not belong to this world. If it belonged to this world, my servants would have fought to keep me from being given over to the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is from another place. Pilate answered, so you are a king. Like, oh, you answered the question I asked before. Jesus answered, you are the one saying I'm a king. This is why I was born and came to the world, to tell people the truth. And everyone who belongs to the truth listens to me. Jesus is actually answering him correctly. He's saying, look, my kingdom isn't of this world. It's not. But I want you to know that I came to tell people the truth. Remember, in John, it also says that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I came to present myself. I came to say the truth. Pilate asked in verse 38, what is truth? It's a great question. What is truth? My assumption here is Jesus told him the truth. Pilate said, hey, what's truth? And Jesus said, me. I am truth. You know why I think that? Because of what happened at the end of that verse. Pilate asked, what is truth? After he said that, he went out to the crowd again and said to them, I find nothing against this man. He told me the truth. He told me he was truth. And I think he's right. I don't see anything wrong here. What's going on? Verse 39, but hey, I'll try to help you out. I'm trying to appease both sides. I don't think there's anything wrong here. So let's do this. It is your custom that I free one prisoner to you at Passover time. Do you want me to free the king of the Jews? This is your king. Do you want me to free him? And they shouted back, no, not him. Let Barabbas go. If you don't know, Barabbas was a revolutionary. It says here he was a robber. That's just a weird translation. He was a revolutionary. He was a murderer. He was not the kind of person you would want in society. And the Jews said, you know what? I think I'm going to take him over the miracle-working Jesus. Now remember, the Jews that are there are not just your common Jews. They're the religious leaders. They're the pastors. They're the ones that have realized that for, hundreds if not thousands of years they had been wrong about the Messiah coming, but they couldn't admit that, because if they admitted that they were wrong about the Messiah, then their position's gone, their, everything's gone. They lose it all. This is what's happening in society today. Like, we have high-powered people in high-powered positions that are obviously wrong. They know they're wrong, but if they admit they're wrong, then they lose power. So I'm not going to admit I'm wrong. You want proof of that? Go back a couple presidents when they sit in a, under oath and have to ask for a definition of the word is. Or you have Supreme Court people saying they can't define what a woman is. They know they're wrong. They know they're done. But they're not going to admit anything because that makes them lose power. This is the same deal. That whole concept is not new. They would rather have a revolutionary on their hands than somebody that questions their authority, their power, their influence, because they know they're wrong, but they can't let anybody, do that. They can't admit to that. We go into John 19 from here, but the account continues. It's not, remember that those numbers don't actually exist. This is just an account from John of what happened. Pilate is frustrated at this point. He has given the Jews every opportunity to keep Jesus, to not have to deal with him. Remember, his wife's warning is ringing in his ears. And he said, look, there's nothing wrong with this guy. Absolutely nothing. He didn't do anything wrong. So why don't you take him back and I'll just keep Barabbas? And he said, no, we'll take Barabbas, you keep Jesus. So he he tries to get away with the minimum punishment that he can. And he says, you know what, let me just read it. It's in verse 19, verse 1. Pilate ordered that Jesus be taken away and whipped. Now, I'm saying that this is like the least of the punishments because it is for a Roman governor, but it was not pretty. They would do 39 lashes. The reason why they would do 39, because it's such an odd number, right? Like, why 39? The reason why is because there was an understanding that if you got hit with this whip 40 times, you were definitely dead. So they would say, we're going to punish you to 40 minus 1. That's actually how they announced it. They didn't say 39 lashes. They said, you're going to be punished with 40 minus 1. And these are things that literally ripped skin and muscle off of your body. It wasn't some, leather strap that just put some marks on your skin. It had bone and metal fragments in it that dug in and ripped your body apart. So again, this is Pilate trying to give the least punishment that he could. Still not good, but a minimum punishment because he still does not believe Jesus has done anything wrong. But he's trying not to execute the guy. So Pilate ordered that Jesus be taken away and whipped. The soldiers made a crown from some thorny branches and put it on Jesus' head and put a purple robe around him. Then they came to him many times and said, "Hail, King of the Jews," and hit him in the face. They're mocking him at this point. I want you to see that these people are soldiers. These are Romans that are seeing all this stuff happening, and they're starting to side with the Jewish people, with the spiritual leaders. They're starting to go that direction. They're kind of going against Pilate a little bit. Pilate's trying to get him off. And the Roman guards are like, no, let's mock him. Let's beat him. Let's do what we can to make an example of this guy. Why? Because if this person who is the king of the Jews, if we can do this to them, then everybody else is going to be petrified of us. And we'll make sure that we have order in this town. Verse 4, again, Pilate came out and said to them, look, I'm bringing Jesus out to you. I want you to know that I find nothing against him. Look, I still don't believe he did anything wrong. I whipped him. I gave him a punishment. Get over yourself. It's over. So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said, here's the man. When the leading priests and the guards saw Jesus, they shouted, crucify him, crucify him. But Pilate answered, crucify him yourself, because I find nothing against him. They are adamant. The Jewish leaders, the pastors. I just keep saying this because I need you to understand this. It's the pastors that are saying, kill this man. Pilate, the Roman governor, is saying there's nothing wrong here. Let him go. In fact, he said, look, if you need to crucify him, I'm not going to do it. You do it yourself. The leaders answered, we have a law that says he should die, but he said he's the Son of God. Okay, hold on. We have a law that says he should die because he said he's the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, next verse. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. Now, one, that implies he was already afraid, because it says he was even more afraid. But think this through. He has the warning of his wife in his ear. If you do anything to this man, bad things are going to happen. Don't do it. Pilate asked him, what is truth? I assume, this isn't actually in the Bible, but I assume to some degree, Jesus said, yeah, that's me. I'm truth. Let me explain it to you. Because he comes out and goes, there ain't nothing wrong with this guy. Let him go. And now he's hearing, this is the Son of God. When you hear this in here, they're not just saying like, a son of one of the gods. The play that they're doing in Benton is, the Greek gods, right? One of the songs is called Son of Poseidon. We're not talking about that kind of God. This is Son of Yahweh. They knew what that meant. The one that created heaven and earth. Not the God of some little fishies. It's a little bit more important than that. He knew what that meant, and it petrified him. Verse 9, he went back inside the palace and asked Jesus, where do you come from? Remember, he had told him, my kingdom's not of this world. He already said that to him. That's playing around in the back of his head. And now he's hearing he's the Son of God. So Pilate's coming, goes back to Jesus. Remember, in the temple, so none of the other people are there because they don't want to be unclean. Anyway, he's in the temple and says, where do you come from? Jesus did not answer. Why? Why would Jesus not answer? Because if he did, he would have gotten off. Do you get that? Jesus said, no one takes my life. I lay it down willingly. Had he said, yeah, I'm the Son of God, I come from heaven, Pilate would have said, I don't care what it takes, you're getting off. But he couldn't have that. Jesus had to go to the cross. And he had to do it willingly. So he says, where do you come from? And Jesus doesn't answer. He allows it to go through the process. Pilate said, verse 10, you refuse to speak to me? Don't you know that I have the power to set you free and the power to have you crucified? So he speaks this time. Jesus answered, the only power you have over me is the power given to you by God. The man who turned me in to you is guilty of a greater sin. After this, Pilate tried to let Jesus go, but the crowd cried out. The crowd cried out, anyone who makes himself a king is against Caesar. If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar's. Pilate's saying, look, I asked you where you're from. Pretty sure I know. I don't think there's anything wrong with you. I'm going to keep you. I don't want you going to the cross. That's weird. Let's not do that. I got a warning. I'm pretty sure from all the things you have answered, I know the answer to the ones you haven't answered. And I don't want this to happen. But then the crowd pushes the one button he has. He's equally afraid of Rome. The Jews are afraid of Rome because they're kind of under the Roman thumb. But all of these governors of the little towns, they're also afraid of Rome. Because if you don't do what Caesar says, they kill you and replace you. And they don't think twice. So they come out and say, if you, this guy says he's a king, you said it yourself, Pilate. If you do this and you allow him to go free, then you are letting a king go free. And if there's a king over here, then he's no friend of Caesar's, and neither are you. And now Pilate is in self-defense mode. I need to protect me. When Pilate heard what they were saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at the place called the Stone Pavement. In the Hebrew language, the name is Gabbatha. It was about noon on preparation day of Passover week. Pilate said to the crowd, "Here is your king." He's still going on with, "Here's your king." I love that. And they shouted, take him away, crucify him." Pilate asked them, "You want me to crucify your king?" The leading priests answered, "The only king we have is Caesar." Verse 16, so Pilate handed Jesus over to them to be crucified, and the soldiers took charge of Jesus. One of the biggest things that I have seen in the years of me reading through this account, and even in all the different, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and obviously John, is Pilate. Pilate is seen as this evil, evil man who crucified Jesus. And I'm telling you, man, I don't get that when I read this. I think there's a verse in Acts that basically says that Pilate had Jesus crucified. And I get that. I mean, he ultimately had the say. But it wasn't his choice in reality here. That's not what he wanted. How many times, I'm not going to go back and count, but how many times did he say, "I don't find anything wrong with this guy. What's going on?" Turn me over to you is guilty of the bigger sin. Yep. Verse 17, carrying his own cross, Jesus went out to a place called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew language is Golgotha. There, they crucified Jesus. They also crucified two other men, one on each side, with Jesus in the middle. Pilate wrote a sign and put it on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The sign was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Pilate is making a point with this. He is saying there is nothing wrong with this guy. I'm doing this because of you. and I actually believe that he is the King of the Jews. Why? Keep reading. Many of the people read this sign because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. The leading priests, again, the pastors, said to Pilate, "Don't write King of the Jews, but write that this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" And Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." He is your king, and you have had him killed. I think this is Pilate going back at the Jews and saying, "You forced my hand in this. There was nothing wrong with this guy." Verse 23, after the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts, with each soldier getting 1 part. They also took his long shirt, which was all one piece of cloth, woven from top to bottom. So the soldiers said to each other, "We should not tear this into parts, but let's throw lots to see who gets it." This happened so that the scripture would come true, that they divided my clothes among them, and they threw lots for my clothing, which is Psalm 22. And so the soldiers did this. Verse 25, standing near to his cross were Jesus' mother, his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So, ironically enough, there at the cross there are 3 women, all named Mary. When Jesus saw his mother and the follower he loved, remember this is John, so this is John that he's talking about. Just so you know, if you haven't heard this already, the book of John is the only book of the Bible where it says that John is the disciple that Jesus loved. John is making a point that he is the disciple that Jesus loved. Nobody else claims that. Only John does, and it's about himself. So, anyway. So when Jesus saw his mother and the follower he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son." He wasn't talking about himself. He was talking about John. Then he said to the follower, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the follower took her to live in his home. Jesus was taking care of his mom and said, "I'm dying. Go live with John. John, take care of her." After this, Jesus knew that everything had been done so that the scriptures would come true. He said, "I am thirsty." There was a jar full of vinegar there, so the soldiers soaked a sponge in it, but put the sponge on a branch of a hyssop plant and lifted it to Jesus' mouth. When Jesus tasted the vinegar, he said, "It is finished." And then he bowed his head and died. This day was preparation day, and the next day was the special Sabbath. Since the religious leaders did not want the bodies to stay on the cross on the Sabbath day, they asked Pilate to order that the legs of the men be broken and that the bodies be taken away. I don't know if you fully understand what happens on a cross. Most people realize the nails in the feet, the nails in the hands, they get that part. But when you're hanging with your arms over your head for long periods of time, it becomes incredibly hard to breathe. And you have to push your legs up in order to stand up straight to get a breath. But there's nails in your feet. Pushing off of those nails is not a nice thing to feel. And then they say, "Well, we want them to die faster, so go break their legs." Again, you have to push off in order to take a breath. Now you have nails in your feet and broken legs. This was a torture, plain and simple. Verse 32. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man on the cross beside Jesus. Then they broke the legs of the man on the other side beside Jesus. But when the soldiers came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers stuck a spear into Jesus' side, And at once blood and water came out. The one who saw this happen is the one who told us this, and whatever he says is true. And he knows that he tells the truth, and he tells it so that you might believe. This is John saying, I saw this myself. I was there. Remember, he's there next to Jesus on the cross with the three Marys. These things happened to make the scripture come true, that not one of his bones would be broken. And another scripture that says, they will look at the one they stabbed. Verse 38. Later, Joseph from Arimathea asked Pilate if he could take the body of Jesus. Joseph was a secret follower of Jesus because he was afraid of some of the leaders. Pilate gave his permission. That right there is another sign that Pilate is on Jesus' side. If Pilate was mad, if Pilate actually thought that this was somebody that was against the Roman world, he would have said, no, I'm going to throw him into the ocean so we never have to see him again. I'm going to burn his body. I'm going to bury it 20 feet deep so he can't get out. You get it? Like, if he actually thought Jesus was a bad guy and actually believed that this was a negative thing, Pilate could have done way worse than say, hey, one of your followers, yeah, please claim your friend's body. Nicodemus, who earlier had come to Jesus at night, that's John 3, by the way, if you forgot. He went with Joseph. He brought about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. Remember, back then, bodies would just start to decompose. The Egyptians were one of the few people that actually had an embalming process. So they would try to wrap the body in better smelling things to try to make it not so offensive. And these two men took Jesus' body and wrapped it with spices and pieces of linen cloth, which is how they buried the dead. In the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden. In the garden was a new tomb that had never been used before. The men laid Jesus in that tomb because it was nearby, and they were preparing for the start of the Sabbath day. So they take Jesus' body off the cross. He's already dead. They wrap him up. They put different, better smelling things all around him. And they look around for a tomb that's close. They had to. It was preparation day. Tomorrow's the Sabbath. We can't work on the Sabbath. It's against the law. Right? Jewish law. You can't work on the Sabbath. So we need to find a tomb quick. And they looked, and there's this garden that's right next to where he was crucified. And in that garden, they said, you know what, let's put him in there. It was a tomb that had never been used before. And they put him in it. And in John, that's how it ends. That's not how it ends in Matthew. In Matthew, it is asked for guards to be placed. Because somebody went to the religious leaders and said, hey, I remember this guy saying that he was going to be dead for 3 days, and then he was going to come back. The follower, we know he's dead. That's not a problem. But it's possible that some of his followers might come and try to steal the body and claim that he came back to life. So let's put our big rock in front of it and put guards at it so that nobody can come and do that, at least until, let's say, the 4th or 5th day. And that's how it ended. That's the entire account of the death and burial. Next week, you pick up from that point on. Because although this is something that was horrific, if you don't know that process of what crucifixion actually is, it is not a pretty picture. The fact that a man who was God in the flesh would come and do that for you so that you wouldn't have to go through it. We deserve it. We're the ones that messed up. He said, I'll do it, and had the opportunity to get out of it, right? The devil in the temptation said, you could command 10,000 angels to come and get me. All right, let's stand. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for what you did. The letters later on that Paul writes will say that you did this on purpose because it was the plan of God from the beginning. And that you would know that and still come, still be born, still go through life, to suffer through this horrific set of events by people that should have known better, by people that claimed to know you, and yet when you showed up, didn't know you at all. Lord, help us in this time right now to remember the different people that all impacted this last day of your life on earth. Because at times we are the Pharisees. At least we act like them. At times we are Barabbas. At times we are Peter, denying you over and over again. But even in the midst of those, even in the midst of all that, your friends, the ones that should have known better, you still chose to take our place. And we are so grateful. We literally owe you everything. Lord, help us to remember that in this season, in this time where we have, regular events that we do to celebrate Easter, and we even call it Easter. But Lord, while it's happening, make sure that we remember what is actually occurring. That although you suffered all of these things, that was not the end. And Lord, we are so thankful for what happened just a few days later. And we thank you for being able to live in that reality now. Lord, touch us now and bless us. Keep us safe and healthy until we get back together again, Lord God. In Jesus' name, amen.